Hello, hi there again. Welcome to Dr. English YouTube channel. This is Dr. Mofi, a PhD in applied linguistics, and today's lesson is about normal word order versus inversion. If you have seen my other videos about the different verbs, for example, or different structures, like the one that I explained about the 95% of English. There I explained that we have two major structures or formulas that all English sentences fall, under, and that is the subject plus, verb plus object. Of course, you may have an auxiliary verb or a modal verb just before the main verb. That's another issue. And the second structure or the formula is about the linking verbs or copula verbs, copulas, right? So whether you have an auxiliary or a modal verb before them, that's another issue again, but the subject is followed by a linking verb plus complement. However, in the second sentence, you have the verb plus or it is followed by object. Well, these are the normal structures, all right, or the word order that we follow as a pattern in most English sentences, in fact, under natural circumstances. However, when we are dealing with some other situations, such as, for example, we want to emphasize our points, or we want to use a literary style, or some other, for example, formats like questions, all right, then we need to invert the right or the normal word order of a structure, right? For example, that comes under the concept of, for example, questions, also some prepositional phrases when they appear at the beginning of the sentences, and conditional also sentences or conditionals, sometimes when we want to use a formal style, as well as the last one is the some negative adverbials appearing at the beginning of our sentences. All right. Here let's begin with the first one, questions. All right. In normal or under normal circumstances, we are dealing with statements like, for example, you are coming, right? But if you want to make it into a question, or the interrogative mode and structure of the same sentence would be something like, are you coming? So we juxtapose, we displace, we exchange, or we change and swap the places of the subject and the auxiliary here in this example. That was an example of a yes or no question. However, the same rule applies to a WS question word, right? Well, look, the statement, for example, you were there. And we can ask with any W questions at the beginning, right? Where were you, for example, last night? Okay, where were you? Where, and then we have to use the auxiliary and then the subject, not the subject plus auxiliary or the verb, okay? Well, another note about the sentences, if you don't have the auxiliary, do remember that if you have watched my other videos, we need do, does, did, depending on the tense, all right? So a statement like you like coffee, do you like coffee becomes the question form of it, all right? So we use a do here at the beginning, okay? Again, we have a kind of inverted structure. And another point about this point about the questions is that, we can also have the, let's say, the negation. Uh, and normally they come in in the form of a contraction. Like, for example, you aren't coming or you are not coming, and then that becomes aren't you coming, as you can see here, right? So are or aren't appear at the beginning of the sentence because it's a question, okay? And note the question mark, right? In all of them, all right? The statement ends with a period, full stop, right? But the questions end with a question mark, as you can see. Likewise, you have the same negation or inversion with negation appearing with those sentences without auxiliaries or modal verbs. In that case, we use the auxiliary modal verbs at the beginning. But here, since we don't have it, then you have to use did. Of course, in the negative form, she didn't call. This is the statement. Didn't she call? All right. So that's another issue again. The second point under which inversion takes place is that prepositional phrases, especially those we are talking about the place, we call them locational or spatial, or I called it locational or spatial prepositional phrases appearing at the beginning of the sentence, like this, for example. Under normal circumstances, you have something like this: a statement like, "The children rushed into the room. They asked me with excitement." But the inverted form is, "Into the room rushed the children." As you can see, the place of the subject and the verb has changed, right? So a kind of inversion happens here. Rushed into the room, or the children rushed into the room becomes into the room rushed the children. Yes, with excitement. Another example with inside, for example, a silent statue stood inside the hall, reflecting the dim lights. Here, we use the inside the hall, this prepositional phrase, indicating a time, a place. Inside the hall stood a silent statue, reflecting dim lights. A silent statue comes or appears after the verb, as you can see. However, under normal circumstances, we have to have the subject before the verb. All right, a silent statue stood inside the hall. Well, this is the second point or circumstance that we use the inversion under. Okay, the third one, conditional sentences. And that happens, inversion happens, only when if is omitted, all right? In order to sound literary or formal or use a formal style or register of the language, we sometimes, let's say, omit if. Look at this normal conditional. Well, I gave actually, one example for each of the conditionals. And if you have watched my other video about the conditionals, you know that we already have 3 conditionals. And some people, some linguists and grammarians, enumerate 4 conditionals. Anyway, that's beside the point. However, I gave one example for each conditional. First, number 1, conditional type 1, type 2, and type 3, as you can see here. Look at the first one. Well, under normal circumstances, you have the first one. If you should need the information, it'll be in the computer. If you should need the information, it'll be in the computer. But if the inversion happens, we omit the if. Should you need? So there's no if here. And then should actually here replaces if, or it comes before the subject you. So should you need the information, it'll be in the computer. The same thing happens when we omit if in the second conditional. Like if I were rich, I would travel. I would travel around the world. Well, but if is omitted, were I rich, not I were rich. Were I rich, I would travel. Okay? And the third conditional, if she had known, she would have warned us, right? Here we leave out if, and what happens? Had goes to the beginning of the sentence, all right? So she had known becomes had she known, she would have warned us. And lastly, all right, inversion happens when there is a negative adverbial, okay? Normally, we use it for emphasis, for emphatic influence, all right? And when they appear at the beginning of the clause, right, negative words, adverbials, such as never, under no circumstances, little, only then, only after, rarely, scarcely, hardly, hardly ever, which we call it, no sooner than, all right? All of these negative structures or negative adverbials, to be more precise, negative adverbials, when they appear at the beginning of our sentences, inversion happens. Look at the normal structure, like I had never seen such a thing. This is the normal sentence you're already familiar with, right? But if we bring never at the beginning of the sentence, what happens? So inversion happens, okay? So never had I rich, never had I seen such a thing. So I had never seen such a thing becomes never had I seen such a thing. The same thing happens with under no circumstances. Will you be allowed in? Under no circumstances, will you be allowed in? All right. Another thing, like another example, little did I know. Little did I know that, for example, something happened. All right. It means that I didn't even know it, right? Well, another one or example would be only then or only. Only then did I realize. Instead of saying I didn't realize it, for example, or I realized it when something happened, or when, for example, I understood something else or I saw it. So we bring only at the beginning or only then did I realize to sound more emphatic. Or rarely, scarcely, hardly, hardly ever. The same thing happens with these cases too. Like rarely does he arrive on time. In order to say that, or instead of saying that, he rarely arrives on time. This is the more common structure. However, we use rarely at the beginning, and this inversion happens. The same thing with hardly, all right? Like hardly had I arrived when the phone rang, all right? I had hardly arrived when the phone rang becomes hardly had I arrived. So hardly and had, in fact, goes before the subject I, as you can see, all right? And another example, quite similar to the meaning of the example above, is that no sooner. But here, instead of hardly when we use no sooner than, okay, instead of when we use than. The same thing, the same inversion situation happens to this example, all right? Like in order to say I had no sooner arrived than the phone rang, which is less common, of course, and less, acceptable in, well, acceptable in some context, but not really very common. But so we normally use it this way: no sooner had I arrived than the phone rang, okay? So these are actually some of the situations in which we use the inversion rather than the normal word order. Thank you very much for watching my video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.